everyone, today we're going to be checking out the brand new Sony 24-70 f2.8 GM Mark II lens. We're going to be testing this lens out in the field on the A7 IV for both photo and video. The first thing I want to get into is the build of this lens because we have some very welcome upgrades, and this lens is also so light. The Mark I 24-70 f2.8 weighs 886 grams compared to the new Mark II version, which weighs only 695 grams. Not only is it smaller in size, but I'm really happy to see that this lens now has an aperture ring. The Mark II lens also has an AF to MF switch, a smooth to tight switch to change the feel of the zoom ring, and 2 custom buttons. We also have an iris lock switch and a click switch for the aperture ring. The Mark II is still an external zoom lens and has the same 82mm filter thread as the Mark I. Let's head to our portrait photo shoot to test how this lens performs out on location. I'll be sharing a bunch of unedited 1-to-1 views of photos taken at various focal lengths throughout this lens. I'll also include side-by-side comparison shots between a few different lenses at similar focal lengths, so we can compare the image quality and sharpness between other Sony prime and zoom lenses and third-party lenses too. So I'm going to be getting some comparison photos on the original 24-70 throughout this video, and I'll show you guys the comparison photos like in a bunch later in the video. During our portrait photo shoot, the autofocus performance of this 24-70 Mark II didn't skip a beat. It was extremely fast to focus and kept up with my workflow, even with the windy conditions we had, which always makes it a bit challenging with hair. This lens uses 4 XD linear motors, so you can shoot up to 30 FPS in stills mode. You could sit a little bit more in the middle. If you wanted to put like your elbow and kind of get like a portrait here. Oh, we've got like the white bit in the background, which would be nice. Yeah, that's really nice. The autofocus accuracy of this lens was really impressive from my experience as well. From the photo shoot, I had the majority of photos I took with tack sharp focus on the model's iris. I noticed the autofocus performance was great regardless of what focal length you were using. I did some extra autofocus performance tests at home. The first test was 3 sets of 20 photos walking towards and away from the camera. At 24mm, I captured an average of 18 out of 20 photos with critical focus, and at 70mm, I also got an average of 18 out of 20. So again, we can see that this lens is very consistent across the entire focal range. I noticed at both focal lengths, the out of focus photos were 1 or 2 shots when I was closest to the camera, which we will also be able to see in video mode a little later on. You've got like there's like a vintage looking sign behind you too. It looks so awesome. When standing still, so neither the subject or the camera is moving, I got an impressive 20 out of 20 photos in focus at both 24 and 70mm, which is great to see. And again, this is all with critical focus on the iris. Yeah, maybe with like your hands in your back pocket. Now that you've seen a few example photos, the next thing I want to dive into is the image quality and sharpness, which I actually have some good and not so good things to say about. There's no denying that this lens is crazy sharp. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that this is probably one of the sharpest zoom lenses I've ever used. It matches in sharpness really nicely with the new GM 70-200 f2.8 Mark II as well, and I'll bring up a couple of comparison photos to take a look at. Both these photo shoots were done on the A7 IV in similar overcast lighting. I think a lot of photographers who shoot with zoom lenses, if they own the 70-200, they will also have a 24-70 and vice versa, so it's great to see that they match in sharpness, image quality, and colors. Speaking of colors, the colors of this lens straight out of the camera look great as well. They are nice and neutral and will be a great base to work from, or good enough to deliver without editing if you do events or sports, for example. I think the image quality and sharpness of this lens is going to be so handy for a lot of styles of photography. However, something that I thought while looking through my final images, and this is a completely subjective opinion, is that this lens almost seems too sharp for the style of portrait photography that I usually do. The sharpness of this lens really brings out and emphasizes every little detail of the subject's skin and hair. And again, this is just my personal opinion because of the natural light, dreamy style of portrait photography that I do. Aside from that, I think this lens will be such a great asset to a lot of photographers who need a high resolution, sharp lens. Let's go down to that corner over there as well. In this next location, I took a few photos stepped down to f5.6, both at the wide end of the lens and a little more zoomed in as well. Could you stand just here? Because we use this as like a reflector. Of course, I also took some extreme close-up portraits at 70mm and around 50mm as well. The details you can see in these photos are insane. And again, as a reminder, make sure you switch this video to watch it at 4K so you can see all these photos in higher resolution. Next, we're going to a greener location to take a look at the bokeh. These photos here are a little more backlit, but it was still a pretty cloudy day. Dan and I took some portraits of each other at golden hour on a different day, and this lens can still handle fast autofocus and good autofocus accuracy even during stronger backlit situations. This 24-70 Mark II has 11 aperture blades, so the bokeh looks circular from 24mm all the way to 70mm. The bokeh looks really beautiful in my opinion, it's very clean, and I also have some sample images that you can download to take a closer look for yourself. I'll leave a link in the description to my blog post where you can find that. In this spot where we've got the trees, so we've got some nice bokeh to look at, I'm going to take a photo at every focal length we have. And both the model and I will be standing in the same spot. So I'm going to start off at 24mm and I'll just chop off her feet so all the framing looks the same in all the photos. And we're going to do the same thing again, but this time I'm going to move around and fill the frame with each focal length. So we'll start at 70 and then I'll get every photo to look the same as that. This lens has great control over chromatic aberration, however, I was able to see it in some situations. In this spot here with the glary, overcast sky, I was really impressed that there was no CA at all. In that same spot, however, as the sun came out and got a little stronger, you can see some minor purple fringing around Kira's hair. In my opinion, this is a very minimal amount of fringing and it only appeared in this set of photos here with this specific lighting. I didn't get any fringing on other days with the strong golden hour backlight. Aside from the portrait photo shoot, I took this 24-70 Mark II out on some other days to see what the lens flare looks like. When the light is softer and closer to the horizon, there is a nice soft lens flare that you can use creatively in your photos. When the light is strong and in frame, such as these photos here, I think the lens flare is very defined and a bit distracting in the image. I was also a little disappointed to find that the lens flare would sometimes go right across the subject's face. It looked very defined and would really add to post-processing time if you choose to remove it. We also have a close focusing distance of 21cm on the 24mm end and 30cm on the 70mm end. The last thing I want to take a look at for photo before we move on to video are my comparison photos between the Mark I and the Mark II. I could really feel the weight difference between both lenses. Using them side by side, the Mark II is more ergonomic and comfortable to shoot with. I don't know how to say this, but I just felt more nimble shooting on the Mark II. Since a 24-70 is typically used for longer days of shooting, the weight savings on this Mark II are very beneficial. I could really see zoom lens wedding photographers loving the size and weight of this new lens, for example. Looking at these side-by-side comparisons, you can definitely see how sharp the Mark II is. There is a lot more clarity and details in the Mark II photos. I would say that the Mark I version is obviously still a great lens and very capable. However, if you need that image clarity and a physically lighter lens for your work, I think the Mark II is worth upgrading to. In the park photos is where you can really see the improvement of the straight out of the camera color rendition. The Mark II photos are richer in color, the tones are a little deeper, and overall it pops more compared to the Mark I. Let's take a look at some video footage that Dan captured on the A7S III in 4K 50p. So far, I think that this is a really great lens for photography. It's lightweight, it's got great autofocus performance, it's sharp, and has great colors straight out of the camera. Taking a look at this footage here, I think this is also going to make a great video lens. I also want to mention that Dan is filming these shots with an ND filter, but just like photo, for video, this lens is really sharp from 24 all the way to 70mm. You can see so much clarity and detail in Kira's face and plenty of detail in the background too. Speaking of the background, the bokeh looks so beautiful in video. It's really smooth while the subject is moving around. I've switched to the A7 IV for video now. This 24-70 Mark II does a great job of tracking a moving subject. It's a super fast lens, so I can see it easily being used for sports and fast moving subjects. Something that I did notice is that every once in a while it slips focus here and there as the subject is getting really close to the camera. I found that this was also more prominent on the 70mm end as well. As I mentioned earlier, this is what was happening during the photo autofocus test, and the 2 out of focus images out of our batch of 20 while walking were also closer up shots. This doesn't really influence real life performance, to be honest, as you're not usually going to be tracking a subject from such a far to minimum close focus distance like this. You're usually going to be using it during a segment of a test like this, and for that, it works really well. Keeping focus while zooming is improved from the Mark I version. You can see that it's only very slightly out of focus while zooming slowly, but focus is ready to go instantly once you've reached your focal length. When you whip zoom, it takes a moment longer to find focus again. We also have a small amount of focus breathing at 24mm and even less at 70mm. So that is all I have for today's review. Let me know what you think of the photos and of the lens down in the comments below. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I make new videos every single week, so I will see you all next time. Bye!